The Russian invasion of Ukraine on February 24, 2022 shocked the world, but Western analysts were surprised for an entirely different reason. It wasn't the invasion itself, or the ill-fated rush to Kyiv, it was the neighborhood that shocked the West. All of these countries once belonged to the Soviet Union, and that history wasn't a particularly pleasing one. Decades after its collapse in 1991, these post-Soviet countries were expected to show solidarity with Ukraine and denounce Russian attempts to reclaim territory. They thought that the illegal war would lead to a united front against Russia, but this didn't happen. Ever since these countries broke free from the yoke of communism, two sides have been vying for influence, the West and Russia. The choice these countries were left with was either to westernize or to stick with the devil they know. Particularly in Eastern Europe, countries try to forge ties with the West while staying cognizant of their former imperial center. But Vladimir Putin has made it his life mission to bring these countries back into Russia's orbit, and his efforts over the last 25 years have been largely successful, as the war in Ukraine and its fallout have proved. The world has severely underestimated how serious Putin is about reviving the Russian Empire. He said, after all, in 2005, that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century, and now he is closer than ever to righting that wrong. This is how he did it. If Russia's goal was to dominate the post-Soviet sphere, it wasn't doing such a good job in the 2000s. The Baltic states were already lost by 2004, as they chose to integrate with the West over Russia. Color revolutions were running amok in Georgia and Ukraine. Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan now hosted US military bases in a region historically dominated by Russia. Things were not looking good for Vladimir Putin. If his lofty goal of a reunited Russian Empire were to come true, he had to do something about countries aligning with the West. Georgia, then, was a good place to start. In 2003, Georgia had undergone the Rose Revolution and elected the young reformer Mikhail Saakashvili. His foreign policy was heavily pro-Western, but he also went a step further, as he pushed for both EU and NATO membership. This was highly problematic for Russia, as they saw this as a threat to their national security, but also as an infringement on their historical sphere of influence. Russia simply couldn't tolerate another country near its border being accepted into NATO. Luckily for them, they had a pretext, one which they would frequently use in the future, and that was to protect Russian citizens in one of the breakaway regions of South Ossetia, the other being Abkhazia. Both of these regions had ethnic minorities, which clashed with the Georgian government since the 1990s. So in a short but intense war in August of 2008, Russia defeated Georgia and officially recognized these two regions as republics. More importantly, Georgia backed off NATO membership, this being the more deeper and strategic reason for the war. Russia was able to punish a country which wanted to align with the West. With Georgia temporarily subdued, trouble was now brewing in Ukraine. In 2010, a pro-Russian president was elected, Viktor Yanukovych. After the success of Georgia, Putin thought he got another win in Ukraine. But when Yanukovych decided to reject an association agreement with the EU, which would thrust Ukraine further towards Western Europe and away from Russia, Ukrainians took to the streets en masse in November of 2013. These protests eventually became known as Euromaidan. Russia viewed these protests as a Western-backed coup rather than a peaceful uprising against corruption and authoritarianism. And in February of 2014, after months of protests and deadly clashes, Yanukovych fled Kyiv and took refuge in Moscow. Not long after, Russia, under the pretext of protecting ethnic Russians, moved to annex Crimea on March 16th. Russia used military force to seize the region and held a fraudulent referendum in which allegedly the majority voted to join Russia. Of course, the reasons for capturing Crimea went beyond ethnic relations. Russia sought full control of the Sevastopol naval base, which would then give it access to the Black Sea, and by extension, the Mediterranean Sea. But seizing Crimea wasn't the end. In the Donbas region of eastern Ukraine, in April of 2014, pro-Russian separatists of Luhansk and Donetsk declared independence. This region was host to a large population of Russian speakers and Russian culture. Fast forward to 2020, and Belarus is in a situation so similar to other post-Soviet countries. Elections were held that year, and Alexander Lukashenko allegedly won 80% of the vote. Many regarded it as a fraudulent election, and mass protests ensued, the largest anti-government protests in the history of Belarus. The people were fatigued by 26 years of Lukashenko. a government they found riddled with corruption and authoritarianism. But Russia at the last moment came to the rescue of Lukashenko. In return, Putin got a subservient Belarus, a relationship now so close that Lukashenko permitted the Russian army to stage part of its 2022 invasion of Ukraine in his country. But the story of Belarus here is paramount to our understanding of how Russia was able to dominate the post-Soviet sphere. Here lied a perfect opportunity for the West, particularly the United States, to support the Belarusian opposition, to push back against Russia, but they didn't. It was one of Trump's greatest foreign policy failures of his first term. This story is not just one of Putin's triumphs, but also of the West's failures. Failures to push back against Russia until it was too late. The Ukrainian invasion is a testament to how emboldened Putin got, where he thought he could invade and get away with it. Whenever Russia engaged in a reprehensible action like annexing Crimea, the US responded with strong condemnation and sanctions. Beyond that, there was no deeper sophisticated strategy. But also it's important to understand that Russia got away with sanctions by building an institutional support mechanism over the decades. It created various organizations that forged closer ties with its neighbors. This proved a huge benefit after many years of sanctions. And only now we think of sanctions as not working. Russia is, after all, still here after many calls of its imminent collapse. Without the creation of supranational institutions, Russia's relationship with the post-Soviet sphere would be quite different today. The earliest being the CIS, Commonwealth of Independent States, created in 1991 to maintain cooperation throughout the newly independent republics. In 2002, Russia founded the Collective Security Treaty Organization, a Eurasian military alliance. The one organization that would prove most fruitful, however, was the Eurasian Economic Union, which provided the freedom of movement of goods and services. This provided the architecture to bypass Western sanctions. Restricted goods could now be re-exported from the West to Russia via these post-Soviet countries. A 2023 study found that trade between Russia and the EU, UK, and the US was heavily reduced after the invasion. But each of these countries also saw their trade with the post-Soviet countries increase. Coinciding with this phenomenon was an increase in trade between Russia, Armenia, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan, including a 30% increase in goods targeted by sanctions. Despite Western attempts to halt these go-arounds, they persist to this day. Post-Soviet countries have proved vital to Russia's economic survival after numerous rounds of sanctions. But this arrangement has also proved beneficial to Central Asia, as they've seen some of the highest growth rates in the region. The World Bank projects that Central Asia's growth rate reached 4.3% in 2024, and will reach 5% in 2025. The West had its chance to push the issue long ago in these areas and beyond. Because the West's strategic capabilities did not extend beyond mere sanctions or other halfway measures for so long, Vladimir Putin is now emboldened, and now this isn't a problem for the post-Soviet sphere, but for all of Europe. Additionally, Vladimir Putin's strategy of waging a war of attrition and waiting for Western unity to crack appears to have worked. With President Donald Trump at the helm, and his absolute insistence on dismantling the liberal international order, Putin could not have asked for a better gift. Europe is still in the midst of figuring out how to move forward. It all now comes down to the war in Ukraine. If Russia is successful, then the post-Soviet sphere will probably be lost. And now, what other alternatives are there in Ukraine? Will NATO troops have to be deployed to save the country? Or will Russia continue unabated with a softened foe in the White House? With no signs of peace in the near future, Vladimir Putin seems poised to push further into Ukraine and seize more territory, growing his power in the region and finally realizing his dream after 3 long decades of checking NATO expansion, reclaiming the post-Soviet sphere, and returning Russia to a world power. Will Vladimir Putin succeed in his ambition of re-establishing the long-dead Russian Empire? Or will his grand ambitions crash and burn? I would love to know what you think in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more content like this. It would really help me out as I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. I hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.